Presidential historian Doris Kearns Goodwin joins me now by phone. Doris, can you set up for us the moment when President H.W. Bush took office? What was he facing?
Well, he faced an incredibly complicated situation in the world when you think about it, and it would soon figure it out in terms of what he was going to have to do about the Cold War, what he eventually was going to have to do about Gorbachev and the Soviet Union failing. And I think those qualities, even before the Gulf War, has to be brought into the conversation. The fact that he refused to deliver a triumphal speech after the fall of Berlin, that he understood that he needed Gorbachev's trust, that he said he never wanted to stick the loss in Gorbachev's eye, it helped the transition enormously from the Soviet Union to the Eastern European states being freed in many ways. And you needed a leader with humility. You needed a person who understood coalitions, who understood not only reaching to the opposite side domestically, as you were just saying, but in foreign policy. So we were very lucky to have that man there at that time.
Gorbachev, the last Soviet leader, among the people issuing condolences this morning. Doris, I want to ask you, you mentioned his humility. How did his humility play into dealing with world leaders and world conflicts?
Well, I think he always understood, as he said, that his mother taught him not to talk about I, not to talk about how great I am. He knew at that time the United States had so much power, but he was able to develop personal relationships with the other leaders. He respected them. They respected him. And humility means also the willingness to acknowledge mistakes and to learn from errors. It means character. It means civility and decency. I think when we remember him, it won't simply be his presidency, but it'll be the way in which he had a lifetime of being a man who used his talents to the most degree. I loved what he said once, that I want to do the most good I can and the least harm, and that my mother told me not to dwell on how great I am. And that was important for America, too. We were at the height of our power, but he never used that in a way that made it impossible for him to make deals with people in all sides of the world.
CBS News' Norah O'Donnell actually sat down with his son, President George W. Bush, on 60 Minutes. Here's what he had to say about the advice that his dad gave him when he took office.
When it came to politics, what did you learn from him?
Well, I learned that politics is an exciting way of life. For starters, I wasn't all that interested in politics, but at age 18, my dad was running for the U.S. Senate here in Texas, and I was interested in him. And I got on the campaign trail with him and liked it. Turns out I like people a lot, and campaigning with him was awesome. It was fun. It was kind of free-spirited in a way, and so I learned politics is exciting and fun. I learned that policy matters more than politics by watching my dad. I learned that sometimes, a vote to vote your conscience is not going to be politically acceptable, like his vote on open housing. But if you defend your policy and stand strong for your policy, people ultimately respect leadership as opposed to followership. So I learned a lot from him.
Doris, how do we know what influence did the father have on the son's presidency?
Oh, I think what President Bush 43 just said is the most important thing, that he watched a man who'd been in public service. He saw the value of public service eventually, and you can't help but want to have an example in your own life when you've seen the joy of it, you've seen the horror of it, you've seen the difficulty. You know, he saw him losing in 1992 and that terrible hurt that it experienced for the president, but yet he himself went into it. I think in some ways, when we think about where we were in 2016 with public service being a liability for many of the candidates rather than a strength, he exhibited that to his family and to the country. When you think about being a naval aviator, a congressman, ambassador, envoy to China, head of CIA, vice president, probably no president had more of a lifetime of public experience. And you're a kid in that family. It's valued from the time you're young. So it was obviously not only for President Bush 43, but for Jeb Bush. And it's a wonderful heritage to give your kids and to be remembered by.
Yeah, it certainly is. I want to ask you about the Persian Gulf War. There was that famous line that President Bush said, "This will not stand. This will not stand," talking about the aggression against Kuwait before sending U.S. troops into the Gulf War. How did his handling of the Gulf War set the stage for the Iraq War that his son ended up leading as president?
Well, it was such a simple statement, as you say, that he said, "This will not stand. This aggression cannot stand." And it was what he followed through on by organizing a coalition to prevent, to undo the aggression against Kuwait. But then obviously he made the decision that the coalition that he had forged and the UN mandate did not cover going in to get Saddam Hussein. And that changed everything in a certain sense. I mean, I think many people in history will say maybe that was the right decision. He was afraid what it would do to Iraq, to unstable Iraq even more. Obviously, his son makes a different decision, goes into Iraq, and that's the history that we're living with still to this very day. So it's going to take some time, I think, for historians to figure out, could he have gone in and gotten Saddam Hussein then? Would it have only made Iraq more unstable then and even more difficult than now? That's what generations, I think, will figure out. But I still go back to that statement that when he said this will not stand, he follows through, he builds a strong coalition, they get the job done, and then he doesn't again have a triumphal speech about it. He simply moves on.
We know that President Bush will always be remembered for his lifetime of service. Here's what President Obama said when he awarded him the Medal of Freedom in 2009.
His humility and his decency reflects the very best of the American spirit. Those of you who know him, this is a gentleman, inspiring citizens to become points of light in service to others, teaming up with a one-time political opponent to champion relief for the victims of the Asian tsunami, the Hurricane Katrina. And then, just to cap it off, well in the 80s, he decides to jump out of airplanes. Because, as he explains, it feels good.
I still don't understand the jumping out of airplanes, Doris, I have to tell you. But ultimately, Doris, what do you think it is that President H.W. Bush will be remembered for?
I think he'll be remembered for his character, his civility, his decency, his compromise, his moderation in a time where it's become less moderate. And, you know, when you think about how you as a person would want to be remembered, his presidency is obviously one chapter in his life, and his presidency will have its strengths, especially in foreign policy, some of its weaknesses in terms of not being able to communicate effectively about the recession and how people felt about that, and historians can sort that out. But there's no question, already sorted out right now, right today, is the fact that he should be remembered as this extraordinary man who his family should be really proud of, and he should know that he led a life of such dignity. It's a life of example for all of us. And at a time when politics is not where many people are thinking they want to go, if this whole memorial for him in these next couple days, as perhaps John McCain's did, can make more young people feel they want to go into a lifetime of public service, it would be worth everything.
Doris, you are one of our nation's most eminent presidential historians. I want to ask you some mom advice. How do we raise children who have that same sense of service and humility?
Well, I think the humility thing is what his mom did for him, you know, is to say, just do the thing you want to do it well, work hard. You know, one of the things Teddy Roosevelt said is the greatest success in life comes from people who have ordinary talents they develop to an extraordinary degree through hard, sustained work. So you teach them not to just triumph themselves, but to work hard at what they're doing. But I think most importantly, if we can make the idea of public service, I would love to see a national service program right now at home domestically to heal the divisions in our country that are so steep between rural and city, between red and blue partisanship. If we had a year, and I think this is the 1,000 points of life, something that President Bush cared about, if it could be combined with government, and you get kids from all over the country moving from the city to the country and country to the city and doing service for a year, the very thing that President Bush talked about, maybe that would heal some of the divisions where people regard each other as the other right now, rather than as common American citizens bound by our nation and our ideals of this nation.
I love that idea of leadership, Doris. Please tell me you're working on that right now.
Yes, indeed. Well, that's what I've just been working on for, 5 or 6 years, a short time.
Doris Kearns Goodwin, so grateful you can join us with your thoughts and your insight.
Thank you. I'm glad to be with you on this day.